Today in the episode, Russia strikes Ukraine's energy infrastructure during extreme winter cold. The United States has called a mockery of peace efforts. A closer look at Russia's Oreshnik missile shows it is built with Soviet-era components dating back to the time of Yuri Gagarin's spaceflight. Europe debates its own security future. EU Defense Commissioner says they may need a unified force of 100,000 troops. After today's Russian shelling, there is an even greater shortage of electricity in the capital than it was, said Mayor of Kyiv, Andrii Kulchytskyi. Several 100,000 families are now without power. There are even difficulties to provide critical infrastructure. After Russia's attacks, Kyiv has been experiencing power, heat, and water outages already for 5 days. Kulchytskyi reported that half of Kyiv's apartment buildings, almost 6,000, were left without heating. Moreover, some supermarkets stopped working due to power outages in Kyiv and the region.
Now we are at one of the infrastructure facilities of Kyiv. It is damaged. Our utility services are working day and night to eliminate the damage. In order to provide heat supply, the work is difficult. I want to sincerely thank them for all the work they do in extremely low temperatures.
Almost 300 strike drones, most of which are Shaheeds, 18 ballistic and 7 cruise missiles were launched by the Russians over Ukraine last night. The main target of the strike is energy sector, and all of this during freezing winter conditions. For example, today in the morning in Kyiv, there was minus 10 degrees of Celsius or 14 degrees of Fahrenheit. The same situation in other regions of Ukraine. There is a lot of destruction of residential and civil infrastructure. 8 regions were under the attack last night. Without any military sense, Russia hit the postal terminal in Korotych in the Kharkiv region and killed 4 people. Where Russia is trying to destroy, Ukrainians support each other, states President Zelensky. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian president ordered to finalize a document on security guarantees for Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky had a report from the negotiating group on contacts with the American side and emphasized that this agreement would be historic and would help end the war. But the main question is still ongoing. Russia's behavior in no way indicate that they want to end this war.
And although the diplomacy of Ukraine, the United States and our partners has been extraordinarily active over the past few months, the main question remains unanswered. And this question concerns Russia and what they are ready for. Russia's behavior and rhetoric in no way indicate that they want to end this war or are preparing for that. Everyone sees this, and it depends entirely on our partners, first and foremost on the United States and the President of the United States, what Russia will choose, peace or continued war. That is why all options for pressure on the aggressor must remain on the table, all pressure options.
Russia not only refuses to continue negotiations, but reached a new level of escalation, said Ukraine's ambassador to the United Nations, Andrii Melnik, said during a UN Security Council meeting. Russia deliberately waited for a period of extreme cold to launch its attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure.
The horrific consequence of Russia's brutal attacks was that millions of peaceful Ukrainians, including my family in Kyiv, are left for days without electricity, without heating, without water supply, at a time when temperatures at night are approaching minus 20 degrees. This new horrifying wave of terror, also inflicted earlier last week to many other cities across Ukraine, including Dnipro, Zaporizhzhia, Kryvyi Rih, and Odessa, reflects the determination of Putin to slap in the face of US mediators and continue his barbaric war.
And Russia hasn't already hidden its real aim: to attack civilians during winter to make Ukraine agree on Putin's requirements. Permanent representative of the Russian Federation to the UN Nebenzia stated, Russia will solve problems by military means. He also threatened that the conditions of the negotiations would worsen every day.
Until then, we will solve problems by military means. Zelensky was warned back in time. The negotiating conditions for him will only get worse with every day lost.
A CNN investigation shows that Russia's so-called Oreshnik missile is built using Soviet components. In the report, weapons expert Andrii Kulchytskyi from the Kyiv Research Institute of Forensic Expertise physically examines missile fragments and points to old gyroscopes and vacuum tubes. Commenting on the technology, Kulchytskyi says these are components from the era when Yuri Gagarin flew into space. It is worth noting that much of the Soviet space and missile industry at that time was built and operated in what is now Ukraine, meaning the technologies Russia relies on today are largely inherited from Ukraine's industrial and scientific base during the Soviet period.
There was nothing so terrible about its use. Here's a gyroscope from Oreshnik. Yuri Gagarin flew with one of this. We found lamps, Soviet lamps.
The United States has sharply criticized Russia at the United Nations, saying Moscow is not interested in peace. Russia's continued attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure were described as a mockery of US-led peace efforts, while the use of the Oreshnik missile was called another dangerous and unclear escalation by the Kremlin, said U.S. Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations Tammy Bruce.
Yet Russia's action risks expanding and intensifying the war. We condemn Russia's continuing and intensifying attacks on Ukraine's energy facilities and other civilian infrastructure. These attacks make a mockery of the cause of peace, a cause of paramount importance to the world and to President Trump.
EU countries should have a joint military force and a security council. European Commissioner for Defense Andrii Kulchytskyi stated this at a security conference in Sweden. He believes such a structure would allow Europe to replace the American contingent in the event of a U.S. troop withdrawal. Meanwhile, Nordic countries are strengthening their airspace defenses. How Europe is preparing to military threats in the next story for you.
The European Union needs a unified army of 100,000 soldiers, stated EU Commissioner for Defense Andrii Kulchytskyi during his speech at a security conference in Sweden. In his opinion, a European army could eventually replace American troops in Europe. He also believes the region needs a new body, the European Security Council, a body of major EU states, including a number of permanent and rotating members. In Kulchytskyi's view, the United Kingdom should also join it, with the key task discussing and making quick decisions on defense matters. This also concerns support for Ukraine.
I believe it's now an urgent task to turn this idea into reality. And the first task for such an European Security Council would be Ukraine. For the time being, there are no signs that Putin will agree with a peace plan. In this case, simply continuing the same level of our support to Ukraine risks deterioration of Ukraine's situation, and ultimately risks that Putin will prevail. We need to have a clear answer. How is the European Union going to change that scenario? And this is the reason why we need to have an European Security Council now.
The European Union has long been discussing the creation of a centralized and unified army. One of the main supporters of the idea is French President Emmanuel Macron. Back in 2017, he stated that a pan-European army should appear in addition to NATO armed forces. Now, according to Andrii Kulchytskyi, surveys conducted in Spain, Belgium, Germany, and other EU countries have shown that about 70% of citizens want their states to be protected by a European army, while only 10% support national defense and 12% NATO. On 10th January, Spanish Foreign Minister José Manuel Albares also spoke about the need to create a pan-European army.
Tenemos que integrar nuestra industria de defensa.
We must integrate our defense industry in order to have our own means of deterrence, independent of third countries, and even move toward the creation of a European army.
Meanwhile, Northern European countries continue to strengthen their air protection amid growing threats to civilian infrastructure. Thus, Sweden will allocate more than $1.5 billion for the development of air defense. The funds will be directed to enhance the protection of the civilian population and civilian infrastructure facilities throughout the state's territory, Reuters reports.
The experience from the war in Ukraine clearly shows how crucial a robust and resilient air defense is. Paul Johnson, Minister for Defense of Sweden, from a statement at the Security Conference, Europe Under Pressure in Sweden.
After the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Sweden, like most European states, has significantly increased defense spending. Already in 2026, the country's defense budget will reach 2.8% of GDP. The government plans to increase defense spending to 5%.
And Sweden is among the top supporters of Ukraine through the prioritized Ukraine requirements list, the Pearl, and a number of other venues. In short, Sweden is setting an example for all of us, and I truly appreciate your leadership. Now, as you're aware, transforming for the future and strengthening deterrence takes resources, a lot of resources. But while the defense investment pledge at the Hague Summit in 2025 was historic, money alone is not a deterrent. We need the equipment, the weapons, and the munitions to start showing up in our allied military inventories. And this is where Sweden really stands apart. You have an incredibly strong industrial base, and there are steps that we can use across the alliance to learn from your experience.
But in Finland, on the 10th of January, the decision to withdraw from the Ottawa Convention, which prohibits the use, storage, and production of anti-personnel mines, officially took effect. The decision allows the return of anti-personnel mines to the Finnish Armed Forces arsenal of defense means. At the end of December 2025, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania already withdrew from the Ottawa Convention. Poland also began the same procedure in 2025, reported by Kristina Dombrovska, UATV News.
That's all for today's News Digest. Stay informed, stay critical, like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. See you next time.